Anna Seewald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about growing ourselves while raising our children. I'm a psychologist, educator, and parent coach. And on this podcast, I explore how you can connect to your authentic self, practice radical self-care, and raise emotionally healthy children. Let's break the cycle of generational trauma for a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Today, why social media is toxic for women and girls. I am speaking with Cara Alaimo. She's a PhD, a communication professor at Fairleigh Dickinson University, where she created the university's programs in social media. She's been writing for CNN Opinion about impact of social media and issues affecting women since 2016. She's also a former spokesperson in the Obama administration and a former communicator at the United Nations. Her book just came out. It's called Over the Influence: Why Social Media is Toxic for Women and Girls and How We Can Take It Back. We met in person because she is local to me, and I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with her. I had a pleasure of reading an advanced copy of her book, in which she reveals how social media is affecting every aspect of the lives of women, girls, and non-binary people, from our relationships and our parenting to our physical and mental well-being, and explains what users, lawmakers, and tech companies can do about it. She has done extensive research. It's a timely book, and I was really shocked to learn certain things about social media, how it is rigged against women and girls specifically. For example, she explains how fake news is crafted to prey on women's vulnerabilities. She also talks about why so much of the content we find in our feeds is specifically designed to hold women back. I really enjoyed connecting with her, and I hope you'll find this conversation thought-provoking. Please enjoy. Cara, it's nice to meet you.
Likewise.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much.
So I would love to know why you were interested in this subject, that you wrote a whole book on it. And it's a very well-researched book. So I managed to read it right in time for this interview. And first of all, congratulations. Your book is out. And I'm sure as a first-time author, it's really exciting.
It's so exciting to finally see it on bookshelves. My book is called Over the Influence: Why Social Media is Toxic for Women and Girls and How We Can Take It Back. And the book really looks at how social media affects every single aspect of the lives of women, girls, and non-binary people, from the teen years to online dating, to our careers, to our parenting, to the feminist movement. And I talk about what users, lawmakers, and tech companies can do to solve the problems that I talk about.
Yeah, but where did your interest come from? You have two daughters, right? And they are very young. You are a woman. When did you become interested in this subject? Is there a story, perhaps? I'm really curious.
Well, I'm a professor of communication, and so I wrote my first op-ed for CNN Opinion right after Donald Trump was elected in 2016, and the argument I made was that he had won this election on social media, and I just never stopped writing for CNN Opinion. And so I write about the social impact of social media and issues affecting women and girls, but it was really my own two young daughters who motivated me to write this book. I wanted to look at how social media would affect their lives and what I could do about it. And one of the things I realized is that even though my daughters are very young, I actually have to start acting now. One of the things that I talk about in my book is that it's really important for us as parents to talk to the parents of our kids' friends and collectively agree that they will hold off on using social media until a certain age. I'm aiming for age 16 16. People often laugh when I say that. So we'll see if I can do it. But, once my daughter's friends have phones, it is way too late to try to win that battle. And so even now, I'm starting to talk to my fellow parents and to try to get our arms around this. I also think that social media apps are going to come after kids at younger and younger ages. Even when people were most furious with Meta over Frances Haugen's leaks, that was the whistleblower who leaked internal documents, the chief executive of Instagram would not commit to not rolling out a version of Instagram for 10 to 12-year-olds in the future. So I think these apps are only going to come after our kids younger and younger, and that's why we have to prepare while our kids are young.
The legal age currently is 13, right? That you to join social media platforms, but you're right. Younger children are on those platforms. They usually lie about their age, and parents usually, I know of people like that, are not aware if their children have social media accounts because children lie and they hide. I know a child who is 15 years old, who is on Facebook, who requested to be my friend on Facebook. And first of all, Facebook, like for a 15-year-old,
that's for old people like you and me.
Old people, yes. And second of all, when I looked at her profile, it says that she's 23 years old. So she was, it says that she was born in 23 years ago. And I'm like, no, she's not. She's not a 23-year-old person. And so obviously, by lying your age, you're going to be exposed to, right, what you see on social media. Aren't the algorithms promoting things to you based on your age? That I would think so, right?
That is true. Although sadly, one thing we know is that even when kids don't lie about their ages, a lot of these algorithms are promoting wildly inappropriate content to them. So the Center for Countering Digital Hate pretended to be a 13-year-old girl and set up an account looking for mental health and body image content. Within minutes, this account was promoting things like tummy tuck surgery and weight loss drinks to a 13-year-old girl. And that is absolutely unthinkable. But yes, it is common practice for kids to lie about their ages, and that is quite scary as well. I do think that we need to be realistic that kids are doing all sorts of things on social media that their parents don't know about. But what I would really warn parents is that kids have to know that if they get into trouble, they can come to you without fear of consequences. Because one of the scariest situations a kid could be in would be to be in an online relationship with someone, to have sent them nude images. That person is now doing what we call sextorting them for money, for more images, and to be afraid to talk to their parent, to be afraid that if they talk to mom or dad about what's happening, their phone will be taken away, because that only makes the situation worse.
I was really shocked to read that about that Center for Hate.
The Center for Countering Digital Hate.
Yes, that example really was very scary for me. And it's alarming. I mean, your whole book is alarming. I read so many stories and research, and it's like, wow, why are we even using social media? But you're right. The algorithms, it's like, who is responsible for that then, right?
Yeah.
If a 13-year-old is being fed that kind of information about suicide, about tummy tuck. Children are so susceptible, impressionable. They learn so many things. My own daughter learns things from TikTok, right?
Of course.
Mostly recipes, honestly. I know what she's watching. She shares with me. She's not using TikTok anymore. FYI, she deleted it. She realized that it was a waste of time. And I've talked on the podcast multiple times about parental controls and things like that. I have really put in place certain things. She doesn't have this open policy. She has time limits on the apps that she uses per day. Like she has 20 minutes per day on Snapchat, that kind of stuff, 15 minutes on Instagram. When she joined Instagram, which was, I think, a year ago, she had to, reconsider other social medias. So we have a lot of conversations, but it was pretty scary to read the things in your book. And Vivian's story really affected me. And there was a line in there that you wrote that she didn't know she had a choice to say no to the people, to this man or a guy who wanted pictures from her, I think. Am I remembering the story right? I was shocked to learn that she didn't know that she had a choice. There was an option to say no. Can you speak about that, and why was that? Because it seems like you know this Vivian very well and you interviewed her. So can you enlighten me?
Sure. So the woman who I call Vivian in my book is a woman who had read a column I wrote for CNN Opinion and sent me an email and said, I got my eating disorder from Instagram. And by that point, my column was already out, but I saved her contact information and wrote to her and tracked her down when I was writing this book. And Vivian was 15 years old when Instagram launched in 2010. And what she told me is that she loved yoga. So she posted a picture of herself on Instagram doing a handstand. And that picture was picked up by a so-called Fitspiration page or a Fitspo page. So she started following these Fitspiration accounts. And she wanted to have the Instagram body. She wanted to have the bodies she was seeing on Instagram. And she says that that fed an eating disorder, which she continues to struggle with as a woman in her 20s. So I spent hours talking to Vivian for this book. And another thing she talked about was just how vulnerable she was at the young age that she was when she started using social media. And so men would ask her for sex, for intimate images. And there is that one haunting line where she says, I was so young and I just wish I knew that I could have told these men to F off. And I think that one of the conversations we need to have with our daughters is about consent and about saying no. And, the laws are really scary because we know that sexting is common practice among teens of the current generation. But we also know that laws consider these sex to be porn, even if children produce them themselves. And so kids could theoretically go to jail for taking an intimate image of themselves and sharing it. And so we really, really have to talk to our kids of all genders about why you can't sext and why it's too dangerous. I would say that, Vivian's story is really, really harrowing, but at the same time, one thing I learned while researching my book is that social media can also be a very positive place for teen girls and a very positive place for all of us. So there are other teen girls who are minorities in their physical communities and say that they found their people online and really lifelines online. And social media can be a really empowering place for teen girls and for all of us to develop their interests and their identities that can turn into careers. And so I think it's up to us as parents to help our daughters and help our kids find these healthy communities and avoid the potentially very dangerous ones like the Fitspiration ones that Vivian ended up falling into the rabbit hole of, really. I think her story is shockingly common. Let me say that again for you. I think her story is shockingly common, and part of what suggests this is just the numbers that we look at about how teen girls are doing today. Since social media took off, we've seen rates of depression, suicide, self-harm among girls skyrocket, and the research is not clear that there is causation here, but I very much believe that one part of the answer is what some girls are exposed to on social media. I think teen girls are particularly vulnerable because we know that during puberty, a teen girl's confidence plummets. And, that is far more dramatic than anything that happens to boys at that age. We know that girls spend more time on visually oriented platforms like Instagram. And I believe that those are the kinds of platforms that are most potentially detrimental to their mental health.
What surprises me is the studies are not conclusive, or sometimes even they say there is no correlation. But clearly, as a parent, how social media affects your children. Like, you can even see immediate changes in your kids when they use cell phones or screens, right?
So my theory on why the research is so contradictory and confusing is because a lot of this comes back to what platforms kids use and how they use it. And we know that girls are on these visually oriented platforms, and we know that some teens can have very positive experiences on social media. And so I think, unfortunately, the burden is largely on us as parents to help our kids get it right, to help them navigate social networks, to teach them important lessons about things like why people's lives are not half as glamorous as they appear to be on Instagram or TikTok, to teach them things about context collapse. So that's the idea that what you say and do on social media can be used against you in very different contexts in the future, and really to help our kids find these healthy communities. And I think, so every section of my book, every chapter ends with a section called What We Can Do. And the first chapter of my book is called Girl Meets Instagram. And that ending section really lays out for parents what you can do to handle your daughter's use of social media, or really the social media use of your kid of any gender. The things you need to talk to them about, how you need to make sure that they are educated in things like digital literacy, and the warning signs that you need to look out for that they might be in trouble.
What are some of the warning signs then? Because children have a secret online life, right? I think everybody does. Adults too. Are parents going to directly question their children? I mean, what do you suggest? I know your children are young. I have a teenager, and I do have this ongoing, evolving conversation. But I think the biggest thing to build a relationship from the very beginning with your kid and have that trust and honor their autonomy, meet their needs, have this beautiful attuned relationship with your children so that when they are teenagers, you can have, open conversations about anything. But those open conversations about anything, you have to plant the seeds, when they are young. You have to have conversations with them when they're young about anything, about what interests them, to build that trust, right? Because if you haven't done that, if you don't have basis, a foundation, you're not going to go far in teenage years. You can't just come out and talk about sexting or not sending nudes when you don't have a deep connection with your child, or the trust is eroding. And, teenagers change, right? They want more autonomy from their parents. And it feels like, in our society, in the American culture, at least, this is what I'm observing, parents give more autonomy and choice to the younger kids. And when children become teenagers, parents want to control more, and it should be the opposite. I've talked about this on the podcast many times, but I think my question was, what are the warning signs, and how can parents have conversations? If their child is rebellious, they're not open, they have a secret life, the parent is suspecting, where do you start?
So I think some of the warning signs that therapists talked to me about for this book were things like when your teenager is isolating more than usual, or moodier than usual, or not engaging in their typical behaviors. Some of these things, unfortunately, can be normal teen behavior, right? But a therapist told me, if multiple signs are present at once for a significant period of time, that's really a sign that you need to get some outside help. I do agree with you completely that this starts long before our kids are teens. A therapist who I interviewed for this book talked to me about how you plant the seeds, just as you said, and you talk about your family's values from when your kids are young so that they can go on to exhibit those values online as they grow up. So things like being kind and looking out for other people, valuing diversity, not judging or valuing anyone for their appearance, and that includes themselves, of course, and, developing that relationship and those values and instilling those things when they're young so that kids can come to you to talk about these things as they get older. I also think you hit on something very important where you talked about parents trying to control teens more as they grow up. There's a researcher named Dana Boyd who conducted interviews with teenagers about social media. And, a lot of adults think kids want to spend their time on social media. Actually, what teenagers told Dana Boyd was just the opposite. They would so much rather hang out with their friends in person. And the reason they spend so much time on social media is because their parents don't let them hang out with their friends in person, and because they have so many extracurricular activities that they can't do so after school, or they don't have transportation. And so I do think that it is very, very important for us to give kids healthy activities that they can do in person. And by virtue of the fact that there's only so many hours in the day, if they're spending time doing healthy extracurricular activities like sports, they just have less time to be on social media. They'll be on social less. But I do think it's important for parents to realize that kids need some freedom to do those things if we don't want them on TikTok all night.
Even if they do TikTok with friends in real life, that's better than being by yourself in your room watching other people's TikToks.
I think it can be, and part of it is on TikTok or even especially on a platform like Instagram, when you're watching other people and not with them, there's this sense that everybody else's life is much more glamorous than yours. And, that's a takeaway that we as adults are also very, very susceptible to. I think it happens subconsciously. And so I think it can be a great idea to be together with friends, making a video or doing something creative in that way. We talk about being in a time of what Marissa Franco calls friendship famine. And I think it's so important for kids to learn how to have friendships, right? Whether they're making a TikTok or doing anything else, but, getting together in person and having bonds that are not only nurtured online is a really, really important skill for teenagers to develop and then have for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I think unfortunately people think parents, I learned this from the documentary Childhood 2.0. They interviewed parents and children in that documentary about social media, internet, smartphone use, and all of this. And most parents to this day are still afraid of physical dangers, stranger dangers, someone kidnapping your kid outside and things like that. And that's one of the reasons why parents prefer their children home and on devices. Supposedly it's safer, but the cyberspace is a lot more dangerous than the physical space. We should encourage parents to, let their children go to parties, socialize with their friends, go out for pizza, engage in social ways that are really healthy for them. And instead of thinking, oh, they're home, I know where they are, but they're on their devices and you don't know what's happening on the other side. And having read your book and other books and having talked to other people, it could be really extremely dangerous stuff can happen. I think it was in your book that one girl was paid for sending nudes, $300 for a booty shot. Can you talk about that case?
Yeah, that was influencer, a young teenage girl.
And can we just talk about this stupid word influencer? Like, what are we influencing? I can't stand that word.
It is a loaded word. And the thing about being an influencer, or perhaps we should call them content creators, is that most influencers are women. And contrary to popular belief, most do not make much money at all for their work. And that's another really big part of my book. My chapter that looks at this is called Digital Housewives, because that's the name given to these women by one scholar, because a lot of these women are doing a lot of unpaid work, just like stay-at-home moms. And so there's this perception that an influencer is someone who's making millions of dollars, and that's definitely not true.
That's the appearance on social media, because they quote-unquote travel, they are in luxurious hotels, they are eating in amazing 5-star restaurants, right? That's sort of the appearance, but the reality is so different.
Yeah, I think that a lot of so-called influencers are women who would have been, 15 years ago, freelance writers and journalists. And what ended up happening is that when social networks took off, a lot of the advertising revenue that used to go to newspapers and magazines was redirected to places like Facebook and Google. And so now those women's magazines and those newspapers can no longer afford to pay people decent money for articles. And so women have, moms who need flexibility and need to be able to be available to pick up their kids after school and can't work a traditional corporate job, are often looking to be influencers as a way to make money. And I'm very sympathetic to this need. And they try to do it in creative ways. I think there definitely has been a move toward more authenticity in what moms and other influencers portray. But still, there's plenty of people who portray these charmed lives that are definitely not attainable for us users who are viewing them. And that's really problematic, right? Because it can leave people feeling less than. So you look at a mom influencer whose kids always seem to be smiling for the camera and the playroom is never messy and they never fight about putting on their matching outfits and their lives look so charmed. And we as moms know that that's not what motherhood is like at all. And it can leave moms feeling like they don't measure up. And I think that is potentially really dangerous. We know that since social networks took off, there was something like a 7-fold increase in postpartum depression among women who delivered in hospitals between the years 2000 and 2015. I think a lot of that, or a good part of that, comes back to what they're seeing on social media and feeling like, their lives don't match up to what influencers are posting. So this is not a book that hates on influencers. I'm really sympathetic to the women who are trying and largely unable to make a living from this kind of work. But I also think we have to think critically about how what we consume is affecting us.
Yeah, it's so deceptive, isn't it? I know people who are quote unquote influencers. In fact, I know one very well. She was not an influencer in the beginning. She was an attorney and a podcaster and a friend. And somehow now she's this social media influencer, right? And she's promoting products. Companies send her drinks and stuff for children, clothing, products, all sorts of things for families, children, moms. And she's promoting from non-alcoholic drinks to moms, to trips, to yoga pants, to everything, right? I get contacted on Instagram. I told you I deleted my Instagram. It's been several months, but I am not an influencer. I don't want to be an influencer, but I used to get contacted for promoting jewelry, for being an ambassador for such and such brand, from fitness products to all sorts of things, all gears towards moms and women. And I always declined, obviously. I'm not going to subscribe to that culture or promote that. It's not aligned with my values. But I know this mom, and progressively I have been watching her, and it's really shocking what she has turned into. She is using her family, her children, to create content, to promote those products and things that she receives. And one time her child was sick, and she's going, they're obliged to create vulnerable, authentic content, right? And show their lives unfiltered, quote unquote, but obviously it's still content for the audience. No one is following them with a camera. They are creating it. And I was appalled one day when her child was extremely ill with, what was that respiratory illness? RSV. And it was critical. You could see it. They're going into the hospital. They're doing the test. They're doing the nebulizer, whatever, on the child's face, the ventilator. And this is all being broadcasted. And I'm like, are you kidding me? This is not, you shouldn't be creating content. Go be with your kid. Be with your family. But I guess once they are in that trap, it gets only worse and worse. It's like a hole that only gets deeper and deeper, and then themselves don't understand what the heck they are doing. Like, I've been watching her so closely. Her content is becoming ridiculously personal, crossing all boundaries, and I don't think, is she thinking about this? Is she self-reflecting, assessing her life? What has she turned into, or what has her life become? How about her kids? Consent. I said a lot of things, but before you comment on this person's story, I would love for you to tell, that girl's story about $300 payment, and then we can continue this.
So Ava developed a following on social media. A man paid her for these images, and that man later turned up at her home with a gun and blew open the front door. Her father ended up shooting and killing him. And it's a pretty harrowing story, but I think it goes to show a very significant real danger for girls who are sharing content for public consumption on TikTok and on other apps, which is that they attract the attention of these male predators, and that is very dangerous.
And how old was Ava?
I believe she was 13 years old when she started creating the content. She was very young. She was a tween.
And what kind of content was she creating? Just like regular stuff teenagers do?
I don't think she was creating particularly racy content. It was just that she was a young, attractive woman who garnered the attention of a predator. And that could happen to any of our daughters. And so I think it's important to be very thoughtful about the public presence that teenage girls have. For that matter, any of us have. To your friend, I think that it is very important for us to be thoughtful as well about so-called sharenting and what we share about our children online. And one thing we know that I warn in my book is that in the future, girls will be judged for this content much more unforgivingly. We know that we live in a society that judges girls and thinks that any single misstep is a reflection of their whole character, right? Whereas I interviewed a therapist for this book who said, a boy does something and people say he did something dumb and he's just a kid, right? That's not how people judge girls. I also think, though, that we have to take a hard look at our society and why it is that our society expects women in particular to share such personal revelatory information about the insides of their homes and their relationships with their spouses and their children in a way that is not expected of male influencers. And I fear that a lot of women sort of fall into this trap where they would strongly prefer not to be sharing such intimate information about their lives and their children, but they find that that's the only way to develop a big following and thereby make money from brands. And I think, we have to think about the context of the labor market that exists in the United States, where for so many women, the options are working a gazillion hours or working none. And so it's very, very difficult to find a well-paying job that allows you to pick up your kids when school ends at 3:00, right? And that's why women are turning to influencing, because they're trying to get some flexibility and they're trying to figure out how to make money. And this is the kind of content that they can monetize. And so if we want to change things for these women, we as a society have to think about why we expect this. And I'm very sympathetic to these women because it's certainly easy to get carried away, but I think they quickly learn that this is the kind of oversharing that they can monetize. And that's really sad.
That is really sad. And they are sharing, and who is consuming? Other moms and other women, right? So the system is rigged against women.
I absolutely think that's the case. I also think that a lot of these momfluencers and other influencers have to contend with something called parasocial relationships. And so I think what's really interesting about influencers is that on the one hand, people see them as celebrities, but on the other hand, they see them as their friends because they're sharing such intimate information, because they portray their lives to be kind of like us in some way. And so therefore, a lot of their audience members will do things like send them messages and expect individual replies. And that can be really overwhelming for these women. So, if you're a Hollywood actress, people don't generally think that they're friends with you. But because of the nature of influencers, there's this sense that these relationships should be two-way, that they should be responding to their audience constantly. And that is an enormous amount of unpaid labor that is very, very difficult for you to do when you also have a family to take care of and content to create in order to pay your bills. And I think it's another very unfair expectation of women in particular, who we know are the majority of influencers.
So what do you think? What kind of conversations should we have with our children, especially with our daughters? Do you think we should tell them about cases like Ava, Vivian? I don't want to use the angle of threat and alarm, but that's present too. Like, our children need to be aware about the dangers, potential dangers, real dangers. What can you say about that? How much to share with our children? How to approach this subject?
So this is the what we can do about it section at the end of the first chapter of my book. I think that we have to talk to our girls about how they can use social media to empower themselves, right? So how they can develop their interests and identities and think about future careers. I think we also have to talk to them about these dangers, in particular, the danger of sextortion, the danger of male predators who are attracted to profiles of young women, the dangers of requests for sex from boys in their classes. We have to talk to them about not thinking that other people's lives look like how they portray them on Instagram. We have to talk to them about balancing their screen time with other healthy activities. We have to talk to them about context collapse and how things can be used against them in the future. So these are all things that we have to talk to our daughters about. And I also think that we have to be good role models for our daughters. We have to put away our phones at the dinner table, with some exceptions, of course, right? If you're waiting for news of a family member who's ill or something like that, there should always be exceptions. And I think, we should show our daughters how we can use social social media to empower ourselves. So a big thing I write about in my book is that if we as women all radically changed how we use social media, we could change things overnight, right? And so I think it's on us to follow other women who support women, to share their content, to subscribe and follow content about issues that affect our lives, and to really use our platforms as a place to advocate for our communities and our families and ourselves and boost the profiles of our careers rather than, keeping up with what your high school friends had for dinner or the silliest memes. There's time for that, but it's not the best way to empower yourself. And so I think being a good role model for your daughter is one of the best things you could possibly do.
Yeah, I don't want to disparage social media. Obviously, there are positives too. I'm not sure, do positives overweigh the negatives? Like, are there studies about this? But one thing I can say, there are a lot of disabled people who create content and advocate for, their rights and things like that. And I think also the LGBTQ plus community, there's so many benefits, right, for advocacy and all of that. People find their own communities, but the negatives are there too. And it's pretty scary. Like, how do you discern? And there's a lot of misinformation, right, on social media and on the internet. It's not that easy. It's not that easy. Like, we can model, but are we really modeling? Do you know what I mean? It's hard work to model that. Like, I deleted Instagram, not because I want to model for my kid. I deleted it for my own mental health because I couldn't watch the same movie on a loop again. You know what I mean? It's like I follow and I curated my feed. I am a very conscious user of social media. I don't have other social media. I was only on Facebook because I have a Facebook group. I don't do Facebooking. I don't like, comment, post or anything like that. I belong to certain groups where I go and ask questions, like in my local group. That's how I met you, right? I ask a question about who is the best pediatrician, and that type of questions. And I think there is usefulness to Facebook groups. Instagram was the only platform that I used, and I joined Instagram since 2012, I believe, when they first started. Since then, Instagram has changed significantly. And with its improvements, I disliked Instagram more and more. I liked the original version where I would just post a picture of nature, and I love photography. I'm a photographer. It was a creative outlet as a mom in the beginning when my daughter was like 4 years old. But as time has changed, now it's an influencer sphere and everybody is influencing everyone and promoting. I just can't be part of that. It's just sickening. And as I said, I curated my feed. I follow who I want to follow for inspiration, education. Even that became too much because if I'm following as an author, you're constantly promoting your damn book and I'm tired of it. You're not posting varied content. If I'm following you because you're a comedian, you keep posting funny clips and it becomes too much. It's the same. If I'm following you because you are talking about trauma or grief, you keep talking about the same thing. And I found myself in this loop. Every time I open Instagram, it's like I have never left. It's the same content and I'm churning with it. And I said, I had enough. And a few things have happened. I shared in one of the recent episodes of the podcast. And one of them was there is this one podcaster influencer who publicly announced that he was taking a break for 1 month in the summer and, for mental health and blah, 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 all these wonderful benefits. But then his account kept posting things. And I'm like, you must be kidding, right? Like, if you care about your own mental health and you're promoting conscious use of social media, why do you keep posting? Oh, your numbers will go down and things like that, right? But other people are consuming your content and you're okay with that? See, that's what I don't like about this social media. Like, because if I want to be off of it, I want you to be off of it too. I care about my community. And so there were few reasons like that why I left Instagram, and honestly, I don't regret. And the question now is, do I want to deactivate my account or let that be there and maybe one day I'll go and check on it or something like that? So I don't miss it in my life. In fact, I am much peaceful in my mind. I don't have to see the same images, hear the same names. It's like it was clogging my mind space. And is it an example for my daughter? Yes, I didn't do it for that purpose, but my daughter can see that, yes, my mom is able to do this. This is a possibility. I don't want her to be a victim of those devices and social media like Vivian, who didn't know that she had a choice.
Yes. So I think, one of the therapists who I interviewed for my book talked about thinking about whether you are getting what you want from the social media content you consume. And she said these answers will change over time. I think it's really important for us to all think critically about that. What I would love to see happen is for us to all share and follow different content that does, in fact, empower us. Content from people like you who talk to parents about how to parent in ways that are healthy for our children and for ourselves. That content is out there, but I don't think it's by and large what people are consuming and following. One thing that does concern me is that a lot of times when women are the victims of hate online, I think the most common response they receive is don't feed the trolls. In other words, just leave social media if it's such a toxic place. And I really, really reject that. I reject the idea that women shouldn't have a right to be on social media and that it shouldn't be a healthy place that we can use to empower ourselves if we so choose.
Can you talk about that case about that young 27-year-old Pakistani woman whose brother strangled her?
Yeah, so Quandil was a social media influencer in Pakistan. She was one person described as, the Kim Kardashian of Pakistan. And she learned that one way to gain a following and get attention was to share very revealing content. And that is something that, of course, is prescribed in her culture. And her brother, by his own admission, killed her as a result. And I think, it's easy to say, oh, but that was Pakistan. But I think that her story reminds all of us of the very specific incentives and pressures that women are up against when we post online. And so it's clear that a lot of women realize that a way to gain a following is to do things that are controversial, even if it's not the healthiest thing or what they would otherwise want to be saying and doing. But they learn that sparking controversy, getting into fights, and posting very revealing content is what generates likes and attention for them, and thereby allows them to often monetize their content. I think we see something like this with all teenage girls, where teen girls realize very quickly when they join social networks that one of the easiest ways for them to get likes and get attention is to post revealing content.
I can become an influencer or gain millions of followers today. I can take my top off. I always joke about that with my daughter. I'm like, that's how it is. Not to cut you off, but our neighbor's kid was on TikTok. First, she was posting innocent pictures, right? But then it escalates. Then it's a crop top. Then the crop top comes off as time progresses and she's just in a bra. Then her pants, her jeans is unzippered and it's a little open. Then she's already in an underwear. And it gets worse and worse as time progresses. And you wonder, how is this affecting her mental health?
Of course. Well, I think teen girls realize very quickly when they join social media that sexualizing themselves is arguably the easiest way to get attention and likes on these platforms. And so all of these pressures existed long before the arrival of these apps. But I think that social networks have encouraged girls to sexualize themselves at shockingly young ages. That's really sad. And we know that the sexualization of young girls is linked to all sorts of very, very negative mental health outcomes.
Yeah, I think parents need to be really serious about restricting their children's children's use of social media. I mean, you're going to hold off until the age 16. Good luck with that.
I need it. Thank you.
And if you are talking to your fellow parents who are in your circle and trying to influence them or, brainstorm together, share similar values, I think that's a wonderful thing. I'm not sure how realistic that's going to be, but parents do not talk to one another. As a parent of a teenager, I can tell you that is not the case. Even if I bring it up and maybe I have stricter rules, I have been ridiculed for that. In fact, I can tell you for sure that if I'm amongst other moms who have children of the same age and I say that, like, my daughter sends me a request for more screen time and they're like, does she have screen time? Oh my gosh, you're still doing is that they make fun of you, they ridicule you. And it's pointless to argue with them because I'm not going to win. I have tried. And so there is no connection there. There is no influence. There is no getting them to my side. I've lost that battle. But if you can get on the same page when your kids are still young, I would love to know if that works. If you can agree on certain things to hold off, I would love to know if that's going to work.
I'll be happy to report back in a future episode.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So to conclude this conversation, I mean, it's a rich topic and your book tackles a lot of really good angles: dating, workplace, right parenting. Obviously, we can't cover all the topics in one conversation, but what tips can you give to the parents? Let's summarize with tips. And honestly, I feel like the burden of responsibility shouldn't fall on the parent or the user themselves itself, that those social media companies also should bear responsibility. Why should a 13-year-old join Facebook or social media and lie about their age? Right? Like, how can they not allow that? Like, they should be responsible for that. But what can we do as parents?
Well, in terms of what we can ask social networks to do, I think social networks need to radically alter their algorithms to stop showing harmful content to our daughters. I also think it would be a really good idea if these apps told people in some way, signaled to people when photos had been manipulated. Because I think a lot of girls are looking at these very, very filtered photos they see on Instagram and thinking that these bodies and these lives are real when of course they're not. And that would be a really great signal to rethink the subconscious expectations that we take away from viewing things on these platforms. As parents, unite early on holding off on social media use until our kids are, I say, 16. Discuss values with your children. When your kids are ready for these apps, have a two-way conversation, just as you discussed with them. Talk about the boundaries that you will set. Maybe they go on social media after they finish their homework. Maybe you agree to put away phones at dinner with reasonable exceptions, right? As I mentioned, you're worried about someone who's sick, you might keep your phone with you, or kids might not use their phones when they're doing their homework unless they need them to look up information. So we need to be reasonable, and it needs to be an ongoing conversation. Warn your kids about sextortionists, about peers who will ask them to sext, about male predators who will be attracted to their profiles. Talk to your kids about how to find healthy communities and steer clear of the very dangerous ones and help them fall into those communities. Make sure your kids have opportunities to do healthy things offline on a very regular basis. And last but not least, make sure your kids know that no matter what, if they get into trouble online, they can come to you without fear of consequences.
I think that's a big one. And you need to communicate to your kid clearly, loudly, and often. Definitely, even if you don't have a good relationship, even if they're scared of you at times, even if you're strict and you take their devices away, which, it's not a good way of punishing children by taking their devices away, because then later whatever happens to them, they know that they can't come to you because it's related to the device. So if you have younger kids and you threaten them by taking their device away, or you actually do take their device away, maybe reconsider that quote unquote parenting technique for the future, because in the future they might be exposed to things like sextortion and bullying and things like that. And you want them to come to you and not be scared to talk to you about those things. What else? Have conversations openly with your children. Like, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to share research, data, articles. As kids get older, I do talk with my daughter. I tell her, oh, I interviewed this author. She wrote this. This was the most shocking discovery that I did, by reading her book. What do you think? Have you encountered this? Has someone contacted you on Snapchat? Have you seen things that are not for your eyes? And what do you do in that case? What have you done in that case? I do talk about those things often because social media is here to stay and it's part of our life. And, stopping usage of social media is not a good way of, doing business, right? But we can be safe. We need to promote that instead of scaring people. Right? When I read your book, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, why are we using devices and social media? Because you talk about privacy, data, all of those things too. But that's not the case. This is here to stay and we have to be literate and use good hygiene, right?
That's right. And in my book, Over the Influence, I give lots and lots of tips of how to protect your privacy and your safety and your mental health online. So I encourage you to check it out.
Yeah, thank you so much. I truly enjoyed this conversation and I hope we can reconnect again. I wish you good luck with the book and I want to know how things work out for you and your children.
Likewise, and I promise to report back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you enjoyed it. I loved connecting with Kara in person. Conducting an in-person interview is always a joy for me. It's really fantastic, intimate, warm, and quite different from the online interactions. I am curious what you learned from this episode. What are your ahas and takeaways? Send me a note to the email info@authenticparenting.com. Call the number 732-763-2576 and leave a voicemail. And for international listeners, we have a free tool on the contact page of my website. Go to authenticparenting.com/contact and send me a note. You can pre-order Kara's book now. It's available online. And if you have comments or questions for her, I would be happy to share them with her. If you love the podcast and find it helpful, show your support by making a donation at authenticparenting.com/support. Your contribution in any amount makes a big difference. It helps us stay on air and cover the many costs related to the production and post-production of the podcast. As always, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. Until next week, I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening.